annual visit of Monsieur Lestrange to our school in the first week of March marked the end of winter and the beginning of spring. The bleak countryside around Bannerfrahan was cold dead when he arrived, and perhaps for a few weeks after he had gone. But when we heard the scrape of his handlebars against the school wall, and saw his battered silk hat pass the classroom window, the terrible boredom of winter suddenly seemed to vanish, and we knew that good times were imminent. We hadn't many visitors to Bannerfrahan Primary School, where my father was principal and entire staff. Once a month, Father Shields, the manager, drove out the twisted 5 miles from the town. In one breath, asked us were we good, and told us to say our prayers, shook Father's hand firmly, and scuttled away again as if there were someone chasing him. Occasionally, an inspector would come, and Father would show him the seeping walls and the cracked windows and the rotting floor. And the inspector would grunt sympathetically and nod his head sadly from side to side and leave without asking us anything. An odd time, a salesman for books would come, but no one ever bought anything. And one morning, a travelling theatre for schools, a great coloured caravan towed by a Land Rover, stopped at our gate, and a man with a beard and an English accent breezed into the classroom. I distinctly overheard Father telling him that unfortunately it would be impossible to put on a play that day, because the recording unit of the BBC was coming that very afternoon to make choral and verse-speaking tapes. The whole story, of course, was a fabrication. There wasn't a note or a line of verse in any of us. The truth of the matter was that his 25 pupils could not afford to pay 6pence a head, not to talk of 2 and 6, not even to see an international cast doing international plays. I never knew which I liked better, to be playing in the schoolyard at lunchtime and look up and suddenly see the tall figure of Monsieur Lestrange mounted on his bicycle and free-wheeling recklessly down the long hill that hid us from the town of Omagh, or to be in class, staring dreamily at an open book, and then to hear the scrape of his handlebars against the school wall. I think I preferred him to walk in on us when we were in the middle of lessons, to see the door opening, to hear his deep, resonant voice boom out, "Am I interrupting the progress of knowledge?" Because then the delight was so acute that the mouth dropped open and the eyes stared and the heart raced, because there he was, Monsieur Lestrange, the illusionist, back again to perform his magic for us. To us rustic children, he was the most wonderful man in the world. Father was stiffly polite to the manager and over-anxious with inspectors, but he welcomed Monsieur Lestrange warmly and enthusiastically. Mother's attitude to the illusionist was at least consistent. She treated him quietly and with caution, but I could never understand Father's attitude. There was no doubt that he was delighted to see him. He put his arm round his shoulder and pumped his hand, and kept looking at us to find a match for his heartiness in our faces. Perhaps he mistook our stillness for indifference. But as the afternoon went on, his exuberance quickly evaporated, and he became irritable again. And by the time Monsieur Lestrange left our house to cycle back to town, always late in the evening, and by then Father and he were more than half drunk, Father had begun taunting him about being nothing more than a trick-of-the-loop man, and scarcely better than a tramp. But when he first arrived, you would think Father had found a long-lost brother. He would exclaim, "Look, children, look who's here, Monsieur Lestrange, back again," as if there was any need to tell us to look, because the moment he appeared in the doorway, our quick country eyes devoured him. The calm face, and the slender white hands, and the long silvery hair that had given a gloss to the collar of his frock coat, and the black striped trousers frayed at the bottom, and the soiled white scarf, and the glittering rings. And then, long before I had finished gazing at him, Father would send me across the fields to the house to tell Mother to have a meal ready for Mr. Lestrange after the performance. That was a job I hated doing. Mother never shared my excitement. "Don't tell me that old trickster's here again." And by the time I got back, the show was ready to begin. It was little consolation to me that later in the evening, when all the other pupils had dispersed, I would have Monsieur Lestrange all to myself in my own house. What mattered was that invariably I missed the preparations, the clearing of Father's table, Monsieur Lestrange putting on his black mask, the hanging of the curtain between the blackboard and the fireplace, the arranging of the desks in 3 rows. The smallest children, frozen with delicious nervousness, sat in the front seats. The bigger ones sat in the middle, and the biggest along the back. Father stood at the door and smoked, his face relaxed and smooth with content. Then Monsieur Lestrange would begin. He would stand in front of us for a few minutes, his hands joined at his chest, as if he were praying, his lean, lined face raised and immobile, and stare at us with those soft, sad eyes of his. Mesmerized, we stared back at him, our throats dry with anticipation, giggles stirring and promptly dying in our stomachs. Suddenly, he would crack his fingers and say, "Would someone please open a window at the back of the auditorium? Or, would it be possible to have a spotlight switched on?" In a voice so unexpectedly quiet and persuasive that instinctively we all moved to do his bidding. So great was our relief that he had spoken. So hypnotic was his power over us. From then on, he had us in the palm of his hand. Although I saw his tricks every year for 5 or 6 years, I remember only 2 of them. In one, he knotted a heavy rope to a back tooth, gave the rope a tug, and out came a heavy wooden molar, the size of a turnip. The other trick, I remember, was with a rabbit who had dull, weary eyes, like Mother's. He sat the rabbit on Father's table, surrounded it with 4 sheets of cardboard, covered it with a black cloth, and to our horror collapsed the box with a great thump of his fists. Of course, the rabbit had disappeared. With a tired smile, he produced it from under his jacket. We knew that the show was over when Monsieur Lestrange walked over to where Father stood and led him by the hand to the middle of the classroom. Together they stood before us, both of them smiling and bowing. I was always embarrassed at Father bowing, as if he had been part of the entertainment, while we clapped and cheered and whistled and stamped our feet. Then Father made a speech of appreciation, thanked Monsieur Lestrange for including humble Banafrahan in his overcrowded itinerary, reminded us to bring 2pence each the next day. He paid the illusionist out of his own pocket, and during the following weeks badgered and cajoled his pupils to reimburse him, and gave us the rest of the afternoon off. It was then that I knew one of the few advantages of being the teacher's son. Every year I was privileged to wheel Mr. Lestrange's bicycle, with its precious box that held a rabbit and the giant tooth, and the other sacred things securely sealed in a box attached to the carrier, from the school to our house. It was a 1/4 of a mile by road, and I was accompanied by a retinue of a dozen or more amateur illusionists, who pantomimed around me, yanking out their teeth and producing rabbits from school bags, and who offered me all the wealth of their pockets if I would allow them even to touch the rim of the mudguard. Monsieur Lestrange's last visit to Banafrahan in the March of my 10th year is the one I remember most vividly. because I had spent the whole doleful winter waiting for it. Father had decided that I was to be sent to a Jesuit boarding school in Dublin the following September. Like so many of his grand plans, this one fell through too. When September came, Mother got the Christian brothers in the town to take me in as a day pupil. And I had made up my mind that I would escape that terrible fate by getting Monsieur Lestrange, when he would come, to take me away with him as an apprentice illusionist. I knew that a busy man like him could do with an assistant who would organize his tours and see to advance bookings and look after his accoutrements. My plans were not altogether impracticable. I had a small bicycle of my own, and from my mentor I would learn his craft so that when he would retire, I would become a professional illusionist myself. Throughout the year, I had put all my pocket money into a cocoa tin, so that when my apprenticeship would begin, I would have a measure of financial independence. I told no one of my scheme. And that March, as I wheeled Monsieur Lestrange's bicycle from the school to the house, I remember watching the others clowning around me and thinking how young and silly they were. Little did they know the wonderful future that was before me. Father and Monsieur Lestrange sauntered in about half an hour later. As Father's good humour unaccountably dwindled, the illusionists increased. He bowed theatrically to Mother and addressed her as Madame, and I believe he would have raised her hand to his lips had she not pulled it away, and said in her flattest Tyrone accent, "I suppose you're famished as usual, mister, are you?" "I'll not say no to a morsel, madam," said the illusionist with a roguish smile. "I'll not say no." And for a man with such white hands and such a lean, patient face, he had a huge appetite. Indeed, so hungrily did he eat that Father did all the talking, and Monsieur Lestrange only grunted, "I see," or "Yes," or "Imagine," between mouthfuls. When the meal was over, Father produced a bottle of whiskey, pulled 2 chairs up to the range, and the illusionist and himself sat talking and drinking at the fireside, as they did every year, until night came down on Bannerfrahan and the whiskey was done. That winter had been particularly severe. There was still snow on the hilltops, and the fields were rigid with black frost when Monsieur Lestrange came. We hadn't heard a bird in 5 months. Had I not had the evidence of the illusionist sitting in our kitchen and chatting to my father, I would not have believed that spring was at hand. Their talk followed the usual pattern. At first they spoke of the satisfaction to be got from teaching school in a small rural community. The striking spark that could cause a conflagration, as the illusionist called it, and from travelling around the countryside, opening the ready hearts of children to laughter, as Father called it. They agreed that each vocation had its unique rewards. Then they talked about the changes they had witnessed over the years. Only really dedicated teachers now taught in decaying, shrinking schools, and only really altruistic troopers still entertained their pupils. Then they went away back to the past, and from there on it wasn't really a conversation at all, but 2 monologues spoken simultaneously, each man remembering and speaking his memories aloud. And eventually, when the bottle was empty, Father became sarcastic. Mother refused to be drawn into their talk. Monsieur Lestrange would try to engage her, but she shook him off quickly. "You're nothing but a pair of blatherskites." Throughout the whole afternoon and evening, she never stopped working, baking bread, washing clothes in the zinc bath, boiling nettles for the hens, scalding the milking tins, chopping vegetables for dinner the next day. all the time bustling about the kitchen, so that she was constantly coming between me and the two men, and making so much noise with her buckets and basins that I missed a lot of what was being said. Not that I minded missing Father's reminiscences. I had heard them so often that I knew them backways. But now that I was on the brink of a new life, every word that Monsieur Lestrange had to say about his early career was of the utmost interest. But worse than the din she made, she tried to make conversation with me. "Have you no exercise to do? Any fun at school today? Why don't you go out for a run on your bicycle? Are you not taking the dog out for a walk?" And when I answered her in sharp monosyllables, she invented jobs for me to do. Feed the calf, bring in sticks, get water from the well, close the meadow gate. The result was that I heard only part of the monologues and witnessed only the last half of the row when Monsieur Lestrange called Father a soured old failure, and Father called Monsieur Lestrange a down-at-heel fake, and warned him never to set foot in Banafran again. "The summer I qualified," Father was saying into his glass as I spread the sticks for the morning fire along the front of the range, "I came first place in the whole of Ireland, and there wasn't a manager in the 32 counties who wouldn't have given his right arm for me. His right arm, sir. France is the country," said Monsieur Lestrange, turning his rings idly. "That's where they had appreciation. 100,000 francs for an hour's performance. La belle France. Dublin, Cork, Galway, crying out for me. An old P.P. drove up the whole way from Kerry, 350 miles, to ask me personally to take over a school in Killarney. "We would be honoured to have you, Mr. Boyle," he said. "Ah, the drawing rooms of London in the early 20s. Lords and ladies and all the quality of the land. Lloyd George once shook my hand and said it was a pleasure to see me perform. But would I go? Oh, no. Banafran, I said, that's the place for me. Banafran, because Banafran needed a teacher that had something more to give, just that little bit more than the other fella. A pleasure to see me perform. The year 1920. In Londonderry House, London, capital of the world. I'm telling you, if I hadn't taken up the challenge that summer, bloody Banafran Primary School would have been closed down, and all the bloody children would have grown up illiterate. Top of the bill in Leeds and Manchester and Glasgow and Brighton. Bloody illiterates and too bloody good for them. Monsieur Lestrange, Prince of the Occult. 15 years ago, the very Reverend John Shields, P.P., came out to me here and stood in this very kitchen and asked me, bloody well begged me, to take over the new school in the town. Wasn't another man in the whole of County Tyrone competent to tackle it. I drove my own car and stayed in the best hotels and picked and chose the engagements I wanted. There was respect for illusionists in those days, respect and admiration. And what, said I, straight out to him, and what would happen to Banafran? I saw me ordering swank dinners for the whole cast and tipping the waiters with pound notes. That never occurred to him. Oh, no, but it occurred to me. They may be country children, I said to him, and they may not have the most modern school building, but by God, they deserve the best teacher in the country. Top of my class the summer I qualified, and they're bloody well going to have the best teacher in the country. I'm not going to desert them, I said to him. My lords, ladies and gentlemen, things are not what they appear. The quickness of the hand deceives the eye. I was entrusted with the secret of this next act by the Sultan of Mysore. And I didn't desert them. I'm bloody well still here, haven't I? In spite of all the offers I got, hundreds of them, only 15 years ago in this very kitchen, in his white marble palace, in the hills where the sun shines all day. I'm still here. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. It's all in the mind. The powers of the mind are beyond our comprehension. At that stage, Mother ordered me out to the byre with her to milk the cow. I held the hurricane lamp while she milked. She could do the job in 5 minutes when she wished, but that night she seemed to take hours at it. Hurry up, I kept saying, because I was afraid Monsieur Lestrange would have gone before we got back to the house. What do you want to be listening to the ravings of 2 drunk men for? She said. I don't know what takes that trickster here anyway, upsetting everybody. And she rested her forehead against the red cow's side and pulled the teats as if she never wanted the milking to end. While we were out, the row began. In the still, frosty night, we heard their angry voices as we turned the gable of the byre. Their talk always ended with Father taunting the illusionist, but never until that night had Monsieur Lestrange answered him back. He just lifted his hat from behind the kitchen door and went off without a word into the darkness. But that year, when my whole future depended on him, he had to lose his temper. My God, said Mother, they'll kill each other. And the pair of us ran up to the house. Monsieur Lestrange was on the street, and Father was standing in the doorway, and they were shouting at each other. Father held on to the doorpost for support, and the illusionist swayed back and forward and pointed an accusing finger at him. They were both ugly with hate. Go home to your hovel, wherever it is, Father roared. Bloody tramp! Bannerfrahan is the place for you, Monsieur Lestrange called back. The back end of nowhere. And where did you pick up the name Lestrange? I know who you are, Monsieur Illusionist Lestrange. Your real name's Barney O'Reilly, and you were whelped and bred in a thatched cottage in County Galway. They wouldn't give you a job in the town if there wasn't another teacher in the whole country. You were never in London or Paris in your life, and your wee cheap tricks wouldn't fail a blind jennet. You're stuck here till the day you die. Mr. Barney O'Reilly, fake, a soured old failure. Never put a foot in Bannerfrahan again, or we'll set the dogs on you. Don't worry, Boyle. You'll never see me again. Mother sprang between them. She pushed Father into the hallway and then wheeled on the illusionist. Get out of this place, she spat at him with a fierceness I never saw in her before. Get away out of here and never darken the door again. You, sham, you fake, you. Then she saw me standing with the hurricane lamp in my hand. "Get inside at once," she snapped. "You should have been asleep hours ago." I did not dare disobey her, so mad was she. As I passed her on my way into the house, she shoved me roughly in the back and bolted the door behind me. Father was standing uncertainly in the middle of the kitchen floor. He tried to look defiantly at her. "I told him a thing or two that he needed," he began. "Get off to your bed," said Mother sharply. "And shame on you making a scene like that before the child. I told him a few home truths. I let him know what I thought. Shut up! Hasn't there been enough said for one night? Go and get some sleep, or you won't be fit to go to work tomorrow." As he lurched towards the door, he tried to wink at me, but his two eyes closed. "He forgot his beautiful hat," he said, sniggering, lifting the shabby topper down from behind the door. "Run after him with it," said Mother to me. "I don't want him coming back to look for it. Run, child, run." That should have been my opportunity. Confused and frightened as I was with the shouting and the hate and the sickening sight of Father and Monsieur Lestrange abusing each other, a part of my mind was still lucid, still urged me, now, now, now. I saw the cocoa tin on the mantelpiece. I knew my bicycle, polished, oiled, pumped, was in the turf shed. I thought of the Dublin boarding school. But suddenly, the dream that I had nursed all winter lost its urgency, required an effort and determination I couldn't muster. If by some miracle Mother were to say, "Go off with Monsieur Lestrange, son, travel the world with him," or if Monsieur Lestrange were to come back and say in his persuasive voice, "Your son and I have planned to make a grand tour of Ireland and England and the whole of Europe," then I would have floated off with him, and together we would have drifted happily from theatre to theatre, from country to country. But now I stood trembling, numbed, petrified with irresolution. "Will you hurry up? He won't have got the length of the school yet," said Mother. I unbolted the door and ran out into the hushed night. I found Monsieur Lestrange on his hands and knees on the road below the byre. He was crawling towards his bicycle, which lay spinning 5 yards beyond him. He smiled drunkenly up at me. "It would appear, my friend, that my trusty steed and I parted company." The moonlight gave his face the pallor of a corpse. His long, thin fingers were spread out before him like the witches in Hansel and Gretel. "You forgot your hat." "Would you be kind enough to lift my bicycle for me? Once I get up on it, nothing can stop me. The problem is..." He hiccuped and mumbled, "Excuse me. The problem is to get mounted, if you understand what I mean." I left the hat within his reach and went to lift the bicycle. Before I got to it, I found the giant tooth lying on the road. Beside it was a square of black cloth. Further on, I found the 4 sheets of cardboard and the mask and a packet of balloons. I picked them up and carried them to the bicycle. It was then that I saw that the box on the carrier was open and empty. The rabbit had escaped. I was about to shout, to cry out to Monsieur Lestrange that his rabbit was gone, when I saw it crouching beside the front wheel. Silently Cautiously, I tiptoed over to it. But there was no need for silence or caution. It never moved. I gathered it gently in my arms and looked into its face. Its dull, weary eyes, mother's eyes, stared back at me, beyond me. Had its heart not tapped against my fingertips, I might have thought it was dead. I put it in the box on top of the black cloth and closed the lid. Monsieur Lestrange was at my side. "All set," he said. "Once more into the breach, dear friend. Once more." He was wearing the top hat now, and it sat jauntily on the side of his head. "As I say," he went on, "once I get mounted, nothing can stop me. Nothing in the wide world." He put an arm on my shoulder to steady himself. "As for you, my good friend, accept this little token from Monsieur Lestrange, Prince of the Occult." He slipped a coin into my hand. Then he gripped the handlebars, held the bicycle away from him, and said in his resonant voice that carried over the still, dead countryside, "Au revoir." Then he moved off. He looked back at me to see was I watching him. I think he was going to attempt to get up on the bicycle, but when he saw me looking after him, he waved to me and went on walking. A bend in the road hid him from me. In the light of the kitchen, I saw that he had given me a penny. I dropped it into the cocoa tin. Father was in bed, and Mother was spooning my night porridge into a bowl. "He's away, is he?" she asked. I said he was. "Sit down and take your supper," she said. "You're famished with the cold." "He gave me £0.50. I blurted it out because I thought I was going to cry. "Eh?" she said, giving me a shrewd look. "And he said that he'd come to see me in the boarding school in Dublin." I couldn't stop myself now. "And he said that when I'm a man, big, he'll take me away with him and teach me all his magic, and we'll go to France and Germany and Spain and India, and we'll see the 7 seas and visit the great palaces and carry red and gold pirates on our shoulders and drive about in big cars and stay in grand hotels and... Then the tears came, pouring out of me, and Mother's arms went round me, and I buried my face in her breast and sobbed my heart out. He was so drunk, he fell off his bicycle, and he could hardly walk. And only for me, he would have lost his rabbit and his giant tooth, and..." There, said Mother, rocking me against her and stroking the back of my head. "It's all over now. It's all over, all over. It will be forgotten in the morning, and before we know where we are, spring will be here, and you'll be away in Tracy's lie to the bog to cut turf, and the birds will come back and begin nesting. I told you a lie. It was a penny he gave me. And we'll bring the skepper bees up to the mountain for the heather," she went on as if she hadn't heard me. "And we'll whitewash the byre until it sparkles. Remember the fun we had last year. And before we know, it'll be summer, and we'll take the rug down to the meadow, lie in the shade of the chestnut tree, and listen to the cow eating the clover, and we'll take a packet of biscuits with us, and a can of buttermilk, and we'll have a competition to see who and drink it the quickest. Remember last year? And on the hottest day of summer. Oh, it'll be so hot it will kill us to laugh. We'll empty the well and climb down into it in our bare feet and scrub it out. And yo-ho to each other down there. Remember, remember. And we'll laugh until we're weak. And oh my God, oh the great fun we'll have. Oh dear God, it'll be powerful when the good weather comes. I stopped crying and smiled into her breast, because every word she said was true. But it wasn't because I remembered that it was true that I believed her, but because she believed it herself, and because her certainty convinced me.